Hi, I'm Matthew Herzberg, and this is the Myopia Mindset. For this episode, I've got back Matthew Martin and Paul Levine because we are going to do a practice showdown between these two orthokeratologists. You're going to see what they do similarly, but you're also going to see what they do differently. They practice in different areas. They have different approaches. They have different experiences. And this episode is fascinating, and I can't wait to share it with you. If you are one of our paid supporters on our Substack, if you went to myopiamindset.substack.com, you're going to get an extended version of this episode, and you are in for a treat. So let's get to it. All right, here we go. It's time for the Myopia Mindset. This is your weekly shot in the arm for inspiration, motivation, and education. This is the podcast where myopia matters. And my mission is to bring you the amazing guests who myopia has become a point of success. It's become a core part of the function of who they are as human beings. The ECPs, the academics, the industry people who are making this work in their practices, in their life, bettering society as a result. And I did not expect to have my two guests on this quickly. I have Matthew Martin and Paul Levine back with me. Gentlemen, welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having us.
To be here.
And the reason why they're back is because, and I don't know if this made it to the final cut of the episode, or maybe it was said after we stopped recording and we were just chatting after the episode we did with Carrie. But Matthew, you posed this great idea to have the two of you back on and compare practices. And I was so intrigued by this idea that I was like, let's do it. I want to see this because I have often made this assumption that even though I know practices are different, because you guys are going to agree on so many different things about myopia management, it kind of becomes something I've taken for granted that your practices would actually be very different in many different ways. So I'm hoping this episode can really show people the differences between two practices and help them figure out how their practice should function, or what kind of things should they think about or do differently when they hear the two of you talk about it. So let's get started. I want to do a brief introduction in case you don't know these guys. They are both renowned speakers. They're both orthokeratologists. They're fantastic myopia management specialists. Each one of them is a fellow of the AAOMC, the American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control. Both are past board members. Paul is a past president of that organization, and both have given an obscene amount of their personal time to bettering this specialty, our community, and the industry as a whole. It's an absolute treasure to have them both on for another episode. So Matthew, this was your idea. So I want to start with you. Why don't you give us a very brief overview of your practice and what makes it special?
Okay, before we get started, one of the reasons why I was excited about this is just geographically and demographically, we live in very different areas, right? So I am in a rural practice. There are literally 2,000 people in my small town. Now, we are surrounded by a couple of cities, but they are by no means what you would consider to be major cities. So I am in Michigan. So here's the map of Michigan. I'm right in the crook of the thumb. And there's 2,000 people in my town. I have a rural practice. And what is interesting for me is my modality, my demographics are very different than Paul's demographics, okay? So I don't have the sheer volume of people in the area, so there's not as much opportunity from a perspective of patients to grab, right? But I also don't have the competition from other doctors who are doing myopia management and Ortho-K at the level that we do it. So to give you some perspective, again, I'm from a small town. I do have a couple of smaller sized cities, for lack of a better term. There's Bay City, Midland, Saginaw, Freeland, but these are not major areas. These are areas with 20, 30,000 people, not 100 or 200,000 people or larger sized cities. So Paul, what's your area like?
Well, I'm in a suburb of Boston, um, about 25 miles or so outside of the city. But I'm in a very, very high tech area. And so all the towns around my office, the people that work in those towns are very highly educated. So the parents that bring their kids to me are, it's a blessing and a curse. They know a lot and they know a lot. But the biggest problem is they think they know more than they actually know. So, I have, for instance, the company Bose that makes, headphones and speakers and stuff. Like their world headquarters is like a half a mile from my office. And there you go. And the people that work there are PhDs and rocket scientists and ultra, engineers. And so, when they bring their kids, it's a whole different conversation than probably some of the conversations that, I have when I have more small town folk come in. So there's just a lot of big business, a lot of big, very highly educated people that come into the practice. And we draw them from all the surrounding towns. So the actual town that I'm in is rather small, about 8,000 people, but half a mile from my office is the next town over that has, 45,000 people in it. So it's the biggest town, or actually it's a city now, but it was historically the biggest town in America, called Framingham, Massachusetts.
Wow.
And
is that where you did all the studies? Framingham?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the Framingham Heart Study. Yeah. Yeah. So those are the people that come to see me. So, I can't BS my way through anything, because they come in with like printed out, like, but I read this, article in the journal of blah, 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 so that's what I deal with. And like I said, that's a good problem to have, but I have to imagine it's a lot different than the people that, that your demographic and my demographic cannot be.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some similarities, but probably a lot of differences too.
Yeah. Let's compare that, because Matthew Martin, I'm sitting here thinking, the patients that Paul just described, this was an excuse that I heard 5-10 years ago. I don't have these key patients. Like, this was a demographic that was highly sought after. And many people would say to me, well, I don't have that demographic to rely on for Ortho-K or myopia management. And you didn't have that demographic, correct me if I'm wrong. So how did you develop if you didn't have that golden demographic of highly educated and very motivated parents?
Yeah, so I will be the first one to admit that when we first got started with Ortho-K in my office, it was very much hard sledding, right? Like, it was a lot of work to get traction. And so when I first started doing Ortho-K, we were really advertising to people about eliminating glasses and contact lenses. So for us, when we first started, it was all the sports people. So I fit the quarterback, I fit the star basketball player. We weren't necessarily at that time. We knew there was myopia management. We're talking about 2003 here. Okay. So 22 years ago, 23 years ago. So we were really talking about, can I eliminate glasses and contact lenses for your child? Right. So for us, I didn't necessarily at the beginning have the people that were interested in myopia management and new information on the studies. A lot of times it was, can you get my child out of glasses and contact lenses? Can you get my athlete into a position where they're more successful than what they're doing currently? And that's gymnastic kids, it's swimming kids, because even though I live in a rural area, we still have all those sports kids, right? And those sports kids wanted to be free of glasses and contact lenses. So it was definitely a little bit more difficult to start and to get people motivated to embrace something that they hadn't, been involved with. Now, we're not that far from Dow, which has a lot of engineers. So we do, I think Paul and I do share that particular portion of the demographic, right, Paul?
Yeah, I would say so.
So, and is there a more challenging patient than an adult engineer who wants to do Ortho-K?
No, well, maybe a photographer.
Oh, Lord save me. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
How many
The,
of
the,
how many of those have you done?
I try to stay away from them. If there's nothing worse than a myopic presbyopic photographer that just can't understand the concept of, no, you don't understand. I can see great up close when I take my glasses off. Actually, I really do understand, but okay, we'll
Right.
play that game.
That's interesting. I've never heard, like, we've all heard about the engineer who wants to like alter everything and has an opinion about every particular aspect of it, but the photographer is one that I have not encountered. The practice I grew up in, when early days, it was policemen, pilots, the kids who do sports. That was the bread and butter in the beginning. So yeah, I can definitely tie in with that for sure. Let's move to fitting philosophies. I'm wondering if this is how much overlap we're going to have here. Paul, I want to start with you.
Hmm.
What is your fitting philosophy, and how did it, start and develop? Like, what, as an orthokeratologist or as a myopia management specialist, what is your unique fitting philosophy?
Um, well, I primarily do software-based design. And when I say primarily, I'm talking probably 90% or
Hmm.
greater. Um, it didn't start that way. Of course, when I first started, it was all, I was trial fitting, and and the consultants would help me, and I was doing the best I could. But once I started really getting involved in software design, and for me, Wave is the platform that I'm most comfortable with, so that's the one that I use primarily. But my fitting philosophy to that end was, all once I really got into that aspect of fitting, was just how to analyze corneas. I think back, yeah, when I design a lens, I it might take me 3 minutes to design a lens, but I spend 5 or 10 minutes analyzing a cornea. The topography, the nuances of the topography, multiple topographies to see what kind of repeat I can get. And I live and die by elevation maps. And to me, that is the critical variable of understanding how to fit the lens, because I fit the lens from the outside in. So, you start in the alignment zone. So if you have to understand what that 8 to 9 millimeter cord really looks like on that eye. So my fitting philosophy is to do the best thing I can do to match the periphery of the cornea. And then, the power sort of, I kind of generates itself as to what base curve I'm going to need to use. So I guess the short answer to your question is, my fitting philosophy is I try to match the lens as best I can to the cornea that I'm dealing with. And I've had a lot of luck with it and a lot of success, and probably much more often than not, I'm at a first lens success.
Right, right. And Matthew Martin, I know you are a wave fitter, but I know you also incorporate the trial sets, and I know you work a lot with, Steve Ernst from Context, and like in more an empirical kind of fashion. Can you go more into that and how it differs from
Yeah.
Paul's fitting philosophy?
So I guess when we talk about fitting philosophy, I thought you were referencing more along the lines of expectations for visual acuity and myopia management. So I think we're veering into lens selection and fitting strategies here. So I want to jump on that and really talk about that. So I started
Okay.
out as a trial set guy. And because I still like trial sets, and we talked about this a little bit at the one myopia management discussion we had, I still do fit some patients sometimes with trial sets. I do that at the evaluation for sure, because that way I can put retainers on a patient during the evaluation while they're wearing, like, let's say I've got a -2 patient, I will often put retainers on them while I go over myopia management and Ortho-K with the parents, talking about risks, management, expectations. Then I take the retainers off at the end of that time, and I'm often getting 20/20, and then the kid and the parents are on board, right? So I still like using trial sets when that works for me. I'm very agnostic when it comes to what's going to be the most successful for the patient. So I do occasionally still fit out of my trial sets because I like it, and it's just one of those tactile things for me. I do a fair amount of wave stuff. And I do often work with consultation. Sometimes I'm lazy, and sometimes when it's been a long day, and I get here at 8:30 in the morning, and I don't finish till 7 o'clock at night. Sometimes it's easier for me to send a topography and a refraction to a consultation like Steve Ernst or Mark Cosgrove, although I'm working with that doctor design contact lens now. And sometimes I just don't want to take the time to design a wave lens. And it's easier for me just to send that information. So I always want to encourage doctors to do what suits them best. Yes, I just designed 4 lenses today on wave, but I'm also have one that's a hyperopic lens that I'm working with. In this particular case, it's Contex. And I know I'm just going to take those topographies, take that information, and send it to somebody else to do the thinking for me.
Right.
And that's okay too. I think it's important to be well versed in all the options. And I often will look at a patient and decide, is this a lens I know is going to work well for this particular design, or do I need to do that? And there's cost issues here too, meaning that for as much as I love wave, they can be very expensive. I just ordered a translimbal hyperopic Ortho-K lens for a patient, and that's going to be a $300 experience for me, right? So that's going to eat into my profit margin. If I can fit that patient through a different company for half that cost, that seems like it's in my best interest to do so. So for me, I'm big at looking at, what does the cornea look like? What do the elevation differences look like? What does the astigmatism look like? Is there a particular design that I think works best for that? And then I send it accordingly, depending on what's the least amount of effort, highest rate of success, which probably makes me a little lazy, but also sometimes just makes it easier for me. And I'm also a single doctor practice. So when we're talking about demographics and background of the practice, I'm a single doctor practice. I have an office manager, but I really do most of the management of the office. So I'm doing staff issues. I'm answering problems with an issue here or an issue there, or this patient has that problem, or this patient has that problem. Sometimes I just want what's going to work best and at the same time be the least expensive and most successful for me.
Yeah, yeah. Paul, I saw you shaking your head when Matthew was calling himself lazy. I wanted to dive deeper into like the wave design aspect of it and how that compares to what Matthew had said. But I saw you were shaking your head. Why, when he says lazy? Why, why was that your reaction?
Because he's not lazy. He's just being smart, and he's utilizing all of the tools in his toolbox, and I think that's the difference really between being an expert and not. I mean, I don't see that as lazy at all. I just, that's that whole kind of work smarter, not harder avenue. And if that's working and you got 6 other things you need to be doing at that one time, like I think that makes all the sense in the world. I will say for me, if I spend 5 minutes designing a lens, that's a lot. Like it's become so automatic for me that it just takes absolutely no time. I literally can I'm designing lenses in between patients,
Right.
So that's just, that process works for me, but that's not going to work for everybody,
Yeah.
and he brings up a very good point, because being cost conscious is a smart thing to do, because you can get into trouble. I mean, we talked about this in, I think, one of the other podcasts that we did, but I always looked at bad lenses or bad designs or redos as just my cost of education. So, if I do end up spending a little bit more on one case, I know that I'm learning, so that I'm going to spend a little bit less on the next case that I encounter that's very similar to that one. So,
right.
that again, that's just me. So I think what I mean, what Matthew's doing is awesome. I mean, it's really smart to do it that way, especially if you have people like Steve and Mark that you really trust. Because let's be honest, those guys know what the heck they're doing.
Yeah, like those two in particular, I mean, are genius level, right? And Matthew, was that part of your learning process, was working with, Mark and Steve in that capacity?
Yeah, so I've been blessed. I've been blessed because I was fortunate enough to know those people early on.
Hmm.
And because of that, I've been out to California to hang out with Steve Ernst. I've spent time with Mark Cosgrove. When you have the opportunity to work with those people, sometimes it's just a shortcut to success. Okay.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you can work with a consultation and maybe they're not going to do anything different than you would do, or maybe they're going to do something that you're going to scratch your head and go, why did they do this? So I also see Paul's perspective. Paul is exceptional at designing lenses. Not everybody has Paul's touch, and not
Hmm.
everybody has Paul's willingness to go through what it took to be as good as he is. So my main thrust with this discussion is just to make sure that people who are on the outside looking in understand that there are different ways to success. So I just had somebody, you'll love this, Matthew. I
Hmm.
had someone reach out to me via email, said they had listened to one of your podcasts and had heard me talk about the lecture on myopia management and asked me if they'd send me a copy of it. And I just did that today. And I told them, I'm so excited that you're excited about Ortho-K and myopia management. She had this big email or this information. And I was stoked that you're reaching them and
Hmm.
stoked that this person is excited enough about it to want to get into it. Now, should that person who's just starting be spending hours and hours and hours doing a wave lens? Probably not. Probably that person should be getting consultation to start and then start dabbling in the wave stuff shortly thereafter,
Hmm.
right? So I think a lot of it depends on where you're at in your curvature of I've done this for years or I'm just getting started. Paul, what is
Right.
your take on that? Like, should a new person be jumping into wave or should a new person try some different things first and then get to wave after they know what they're doing? Like, how does that work?
I think the today's version of Wave is not what we were using 15 years ago, 20 years ago.
100%.
Um, you really can import a topography that you think is a good one. You can basically press one or two little buttons, and honestly, that lens is probably going to work most of the time, even without all of your nuances. So I think that people can get into software designing right away. I mean, look at iSpace is the same. Plug in the topography, push a button, and that lens is going to work most of the time, right?
Hmm.
So I think that I grew up on I have to do a lot of this myself. I have to do a lot of these manipulations myself. And it's gotten to the point that it's very fast for me. But I think new fitters shouldn't be overly intimidated by software designing because it has really become automated in a lot of ways. Nowadays we're very fortunate. That being said, you don't really know what you don't know. So looking at something on a screen with a mock-up of a proposed fluorescein pattern, as opposed to getting lenses on eyes and understanding the you know um, trying to match sagittal depth of a lens with an eye. Like, I don't think there's any way around such an important component of your education in Ortho-K is to see as many lenses on eyes as you can, and lenses of known parameters, because if you use a fitting set, you know what you're putting on. If you
Yes.
Hmm.
design a lens, you don't necessarily know what you're putting on. And so I think you can go straight into it, but I think that it would behoove you, long-term goal would be to evaluate as many lenses of known parameters on eyeballs as you can.
Right.
I just think that'll help calibrate your brain as to what you need to do to design your own lenses.
Yeah, and I think in my opinion, one of the most important things is how much are you learning? If you're not learning then I think that's working against you. And the example that I have is, for a couple of years, I was selling Ability overnight, Johnson & Johnson's Ortho-K lens. And there was a clinical consultation component. Now, obviously, it's nothing compared to Steve Ernst or Mark Cosgrove, right? But I had to learn really quickly the clinical aspects of orthokeratology, which was a brand new world for me. And I did not realize how exciting it was and how much of a sponge I would be for it. But unfortunately, a lot of the new to myopia management or Ortho-K docs just simply didn't understand what was happening. And what they were used to was these like plug and play products that were like, oh, just send us the Ks or the topography images or whatever the case, and we'll design the lens for you. And then they had no idea what was happening and they wanted to learn. So I had to learn as well in order to figure out what their needs were. And you were talking about designing lenses from the outside in earlier in the conversation. I mean, I would get these garbage topographies because it's like, well, why isn't this lens working? And I'd be like, okay, well, let me see your topography images. And it's like, yeah, exactly. For the audio listeners, Matthew just enclosed his hands in a circle, restricting the amount of where the potential data is. You'd have lids, eyelashes, all of it in the way, and just the colored portion in the center right there. And I'd be like, well, here's your problem. Like, how are you supposed to design a lens that's actually going to fit if we don't have enough data to work with? So, I mean, that's my take on it is like, do what's best for your learning potential. If you are like Paul and you learn best in that capacity, then that's what you should do. Pursue something like Wave. In Matthew's case, if it involves a trial set, if it involves a Steve Ernst or a Mark Cosgrove, and you can learn along the way with them, I think that's the best way to go. What do you guys
think? A big part of that's asking questions too, right? So what are you doing here? How are we changing this? What aspect are we altering here? I mean, all that's a factor. I want to take a moment and actually I don't know if Paul remembers this, but if you go back far enough, we're talking like 2004, 5, 6, something like that. Everything that we look at when we look at a Ortho-K lens now, we look at this tier layer design that shows you exactly what the Ortho-K lens is doing. Do you know that we didn't know that at one time, or we didn't even look at lenses like that at one time? We looked at fluoresceins and we were like, that looks good, or this doesn't look good, or we need to loosen it and tighten it. That whole looking at the tear film, that really is like all Wave all the time. Like, we honestly didn't even look at lenses like that at one time. And it's wild to me that that was a thing that we didn't realize or we didn't conceptualize with designing how the tear film worked from a perspective of laying that tear film sideways and looking at that 3-curve or 4-curve design. Like, that's amazing to me. Paul, do you remember that time? I know I sound old, and I always hate when I go to lectures and they're like, do you remember when lenses were like this? And I'm doing it now, but it's such a watershed moment when they first presented this and we're like, hey, look, this is what it looks like. I was like, wow. It was crazy that they took that fluorescein and turned it sideways and showed us what it looked like. Like, I couldn't imagine it any other way now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and indeed, because listen, fluorescein patterns are important, and they're and you have to evaluate them, but there's a lot of room for error in those.
20 microns?
I mean, it at least to 20 microns, right? But that doesn't change 20 microns or not. You've still got someone sitting upright, watering eyes, blinking like crazy, chin in a chin rest, forehead against the thing, blinking. Like, that's not how you sleep. At least I certainly hope that's not how you sleep. And like I always say to the patients, I'm like, listen, the lens looks good. But the problem is, as soon as the eyelid closes, it's just like the refrigerator door. Like, I really don't know if the light turns on or off. I just don't know. As soon as the lid comes down, I have no idea where that lens is anymore. I just can't know. And so when you have those theoretical fluorescein pattern tier layer profiles, at least you it gives you a graphical understanding of how that lens is going to look, and if it looks halfway decent and the fluorescein pattern looks halfway decent and the over refraction is pretty much Plano to plus 50, like, you're probably going to be okay. So I totally agree with you that the whole, like, yeah, that's like a total game changer once we started looking at those tier layer profiles for sure.
Yeah, I love the example that you use with the refrigerator. And
That's wonderful. I never thought about it that way, but that's fantastic.
let's use that as a transition into, dealing with difficult fits or difficult corneas, corneal shapes, high myopes, and patient selection. Matthew Martin, how do you handle patient selection and difficult cases, for instance?
Yeah, I think that I just took on two very difficult patients today. One of which is like 3 diopters or 3.5 diopters of astigmatism, on top of like 4 or 5 diopters of nearsightedness, which is a fairly challenging case. And I designed it with a wave lens, by the way, just FYI. But I think the big take-home message is when you're going to take on a case like that, you really need to talk to the patient about expectations and patience. So number one, you have to increase your fee, and we can't ever discuss numbers specifically here because of ethical and industry standards. But I think you need to be, and I preach this all the time from stage, and I preach this all the time in any webinar, and that is you need to be charging enough to make sure that you're going to be profitable and to make sure that you're excited about doing Ortho-K. So one of the things that kills Ortho-K in a lot of practices is not charging appropriately. And so because when people don't charge appropriately, they don't want to continue to do it, right? So if you don't charge enough and you do Ortho-K and it's not successful and you've paid out more money than you brought in and not even including chair time, then you're not going to want to do any more of it, right? So I think the big take-home message is that when I take on a challenging case, the -4, -3 axes 180 case I just took on, you need to be aware that the money needs to be discussed up front and that the patience that the patient has to have needs to be there. So I often, when I'm taking on those complicated patients, I'll say, look, you've got 150 micron difference between the curvatures in the periphery, right? We're going to have to incorporate that into the fit. We're going to have to incorporate that into the power. You need to be patient with me. It could take 2 or 3 lenses to get there. And then I need to charge an amount that is appropriate for that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I don't know where Paul's stance is on that, but over time, I have taken on more and more complicated cases, sometimes to wild success, and sometimes it doesn't work out. But if it doesn't work out, the patient needs to know that you've done everything that anyone anywhere could do, and that sometimes they have to just be patient enough to get us to where we need to be to make them happy. Paul, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree with everything you said. I certainly have a fee scale, which has to do with complexity for sure, because those challenging cases. If you get real lucky, you're going to hit it the first time, but there's a pretty good chance you might have to redo a lens or 2 or 3. There's going to be a few more visits into the office. Those high minuses are going to take longer to mold, which means now you got to train them how to use soft lenses during that interim period. Like, it is a longer process. It's a lengthy process. There's much more chair time involved and a lot more hand holding. So I agree with you. You have to charge for what that's worth. You also need the patients and their parents to have skin in that game. Like, this is not an insignificant amount of money that you're pledging to spend on this situation. So they're motivated to make it work,
I think that's very important because I think one of the things that I've run into at the practice, and I'm so glad we're talking about this, is whenever anyone complains about my fees, I raise my fees. And that's because I don't want the person who wants to spend no money at all, because they're not going to want to put the time in. If something is free, people don't want to put the effort in.
Mm-hmm.
If there's money involved, then people want to make it work, and it's going to work. if you put set your fees too low, they're not going to want to put the effort into it because they're like, man, it's not that much money. Maybe I don't want to do it. I want to put the effort in. So I think that's an interesting conversation to have as well. Paul, is there a line in the sand where you're like, I'm not going to do that? Like, is there a number in your mind, or are you pretty flexible as long as the money and the effort and the enthusiasm are present?
Yes. I mean, okay, so I'm pretty comfortable. Anything under about a -8, I'm pretty confident that I'm going to be okay, assuming that I got a good cornea. There's nothing weird about it. I have a decent refractive versus corneal cylinder match. Like, if it's a fairly straightforward case, it's just a big number, I feel pretty good about it. If they're coming in at a minus even a 6 with 3 diopters a cylinder, it's a different conversation. If they've got 3 diopters of corneal cyl but no refractive cylinder, it's a different conversation. And so that's when I'll start talking about things like, listen, we can do this. We can definitely make you see better, but I don't know that I'm going to be able to get you to 20/20. I don't know that I'm going to be able to do this, maybe without you wearing part-time spectacle correction for the part that we can't mold out. But by the way, if we're doing it for myopia management and to control myopia, even partial Ortho-K treatment is been proven to be effective. So we're still going to get the benefit of the Ortho-K. We're still going to be able to wake up in the morning and see what time it is on the clock, but we might have to put glasses on to drive, or we might have to put glasses on in if you're sitting in the back of a classroom, so that's kind of how I will go through that.
So this exactly matches my most recent case that I'm talking about. I had a conversation with him. I'm like, you've got a lot of astigmatism. I really can't put you into a peripheral defocus contact lenses without you having to wear the peripheral defocus contact lens and then glasses. If I fit you with Ortho-K, you may end up 20/25 because 20/25 is the best you're getting right now in glasses anyways, okay? So I'm not going to get better than that, although sometimes I do between you and I, right?
I have to.
I'm not going to guarantee that. Mm-hmm. But I'm like, I send this to them in an email. This is what my expectations are. You need to know that it's going to be good, but not amazing. But if we can slow down your progression and give you good functional vision, then that's a success. Mm-hmm. And I think you and I are talking about the same thing there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And it's that a lot of counseling.
It's that old adage of, like, what is it? Under promise and over deliver, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. And people often underestimate the value of improving things, especially for someone who's really suffering from a situation where there's nothing else that they can do. Like, being able to adjust it is a significant benefit. Like, even if you can't get them all the way to 20/20, there's still a huge benefit in making their life significantly better. And I think that's often discounted. It's like, well, you can do a lot. Maybe you can't get all the way to that perfect result that you're looking for, but you can still make a meaningful change for that patient in their daily life. Like my wife, it's like she's basically blind without her glasses, right? And if you could improve that to a certain point where like things would be so much better, that would be a huge difference maker for her. You know what I mean? Like, and Ortho-K is the perfect solution for that, right? The other thing I wanted to add too is when it comes to pricing, like I have had this conversation so many times with doctors in their practices where I said, look, you got to charge appropriately. If we gave this away for free, nobody would trust us. They'd be like, this doesn't work. And there are examples of some docs out there who have done like charity cases where they have done free cases for the community because, Matthew Martin, you've done that. So tell us. I have. It. Yeah.
They don't appreciate it.
Exactly. Yeah.
You would think that they'd be like, oh my gosh, you're the best ever. Thank you for doing this. I've done free cases and they're 20/20 and they're like, nah, I don't want to wear them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why? Why don't they want to wear them? Because they didn't invest any money into it. And because it doesn't cost them anything not to do it.
And so this is a consistent thing across the board. Go ahead. Yeah.
classic example of this patient. I saw them for years. He was -3 myope. I had him in retainers. Everything was going well. He went into the army, and didn't come back for a couple years, then came back and said, my financial situation is difficult. And I'm having these issues. I said, you know what? I'm going to reach out to my lab reps. So I reached out to, might have been Steve Ernst, might have been Mark Cosgrove. One of the two was kind enough to be like, this guy's in the military. It's the least we can do as patriots to make those free retainers for him. And I said, I will do his professional services for free because I believe in doing right by my country and by my people. More than happy to do that. Never came back after that. Never said thank you. Never there has to be skin in the game. I think there does. There needs to be some reason for them to want to pursue and to want to make it a functional and good thing for them.
Right. And there's so many stories like this. Like, I feel like I'm collecting them from docs who have tried to do Ortho-K for free as a charity case. And every single one of them will tell you those are the patients that dropped out. No skin in the game, didn't matter, didn't work. And so that's another reason why you need to charge appropriately. That's just the way that things are. If we gave it away for free, nobody would trust it, and it wouldn't go anywhere. So, yeah, definitely. Thank you for adding that.
Can we take a few moments to talk about fees without actually naming any numbers?
Yeah, don't make me start bleeping things out.
No, I don't want to name any numbers, but I really do want to talk about fees. And I talk about this, and I know Paul does too, when we're on stage together. I think we talk a lot about this, and I think it's important. I want to emphasize to the people who are interested in myopia management or interested specifically in Ortho-K to make sure that you're charging commensurate with your expertise. Meaning, have you taken the time to listen to a podcast by Matthew Herzberg? Have you gone to Vision by Design? Have you gone to GSLS? Have you heard Paul Levine on stage, which frankly, I would pay for the privilege of hearing Paul on stage. If you've taken the time to educate yourself, if you've taken the time to purchase software specifically to design lenses, if you've taken the time to buy a fit set to learn to do this and do it well, then you should be paid appropriately for your expertise. And so for the people out there who are maybe on the fence about this, or for the people who are just getting started, I think it's important to remember that it needs to be a profit center for the office in order for you to be enthusiastic about doing it. I run into altogether too many doctors who failed with myopia management or who failed specifically with Ortho-K by not charging appropriately. Like, I run into doctors all the time who are prescribing MiSight lenses or who are prescribing low-dose atropine and who are not charging appropriately for their programs. And I think that's an utter failure. And I think it's bad for the profession. And I think it's bad for them as individual doctors and practices. Now, whenever I get on a tirade like this and I listen to it afterwards, I'm always want to crawl under a chair, but I'll hold to that. I think that's true. Paul, do you have a take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're going to be a specialist, then charge like one.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to be a general practitioner, then you need to refer to the specialist. I mean, we do it all the time. The last time I checked, LASIK surgeons weren't giving it away for free. In fact, 20 years ago, the patients would say, oh, I'm just going to wait until the price comes down. Guess what? The price hasn't come down in 20 years. Yeah. Has anybody noticed that?
Yeah, it hasn't.
Yeah. So, it's, if you're going to be the boss, you got to be the boss, right? People are coming a long way to see you for your expertise. They're going to anticipate that this might cost me a little bit more because I'm going to see a special person who 10 different people told me I should go see. So I think that's how you really differentiate yourself from dabbling to expertise.
Right.
And I mean, and sadly, that does transcend into, what it costs to come see that doctor, you know.
Right. And how do we establish a fee structure again without mentioning specific numbers? Don't get me in trouble. But like, let's talk about how we established a fee structure for each of you. Like, I'm always interested in, just to give you an example, in the consult. Some charge for it, some don't. And I think there's great reasons behind each. Matthew, let's start with you. Well, if consult is the place you want to start with it, but like, how do you determine your fee structure?
I think that's wonderful. I don't charge for my consults.
Okay.
Which is absolutely opposite of a lot of doctors I talk to. And part of that, I think, is because of the area I'm at. I don't have the volume of people to draw from. And part of that, honestly, I think comes down to my ability to close the deal, if you will, or to convert the patient. So for me, I don't charge for the consultation because I feel like if I'm doing a good job presenting the whys of why we should do a thing and the details on it, then my consultation should be a fairly high conversion rate. Okay. So I think it's an interesting discussion. Paul, do you charge or do you not charge?
I charge.
Okay.
Okay, tell
Why?
me why.
Um, just what I said. People are coming from distance to see me. People have been referred to me. It doesn't do me any good to spend 45 minutes or an hour of my time and not get paid for it. I was not charging at one point, and my close rate or capture rate was low. Once I started charging, my capture rate went way up. And I think it was like we said, these people now already have skin in the game. They've already dropped, some dollars in the practice to be evaluated for this wonderful and amazing program. And yep, I think we're going to do it.
What if you do if their cornea is not appropriate? Or what if you do if their sill doesn't match their corneal sill? Or do you charge them if you're like, well, shoot, you're just not a candidate?
Okay, so the worst candidates I have gotten so far to this point in my practice were referred to me by other ODs.
Oh yeah, totally, dude. I get that.
Hi, I have, +7 -14 axis 6. Yeah, my eye doctor said you could
90.
Fix it. Yeah.
90.
I've definitely told people, you know what? We're not even going to proceed with this. I'm not charging you anything for this visit. It's just, this is not going to work for you. I'm happy to look into other alternatives. I'm happy to try to fit you into, we have scleral lenses, we have soft lenses, other things that we can do, but Ortho-K is not going to work for you. And I'll just sort of end it right there. Once, if I know that they're a terrible candidate for it. But I'll try to do the best I can. If they're not a candidate, why wouldn't they be a candidate for Ortho-K? Well, maybe they have a lousy prescription. Like, I try to get information sent to me before they even come in.
Sure.
I need to see your last notes from your last eye doctor before we'll even book your appointment. So I'm trying to sort of cull through the nonsense before they ever actually show up in my office.
So is your volume in your area so good that you've got 3 or 4 evaluations a day?
Not every day, but I have days with 3 or 4 evaluations. I've probably done 10 or 15 evals already this, this month or the last 6 weeks. Yeah, so I get a lot of them.
That's definitely a demographics thing. I have to work much harder.
All right, well, that's it for this regular version of the episode, but the discussion doesn't stop here. It actually continues in an extended version of this episode, which is available to our Substack supporters. You can, if you're interested in getting the rest of the episode, consider becoming a paid supporter of the Myopia Mindset. In addition to an extended version of this episode and every other episode that we do, you'll also get access to exclusive monthly bonus episodes of the Myopia Mindset. And I know you're interested. You've made it this far. And for the cost is $12 a month, which is basically the cost of a cup of coffee each and every week. And that's how I like to put it. Listen, if you would buy me a cup of coffee each and every week to nerd out about myopia, to bring on amazing guests, to spread the word about how awesome myopia management is and how more ECPs should be engaged in this specialty, then please consider becoming a paid supporter of the Myopia Mindset. You can do so on our Substack. myopiamindset.substack.com is how you do that. Thank you so much for your consideration. I'll see you at the next one.